The younger officer laughed so hard he had to lean against the patrol car. "Sir," he said, wiping tears from the corners of his eyes, "you really, truly expect us to believe that?" His partner was already talking into his radio, voice flat and professional, something about a confused subject at 4112 Elmhurst Drive, possible need for a psych evaluation. I sat on the curb in my jeans and my old Howard University sweatshirt, wrists zip-tied behind my back, the concrete still warm from the afternoon sun, watching the two of them not even try to hide their amusement. I thought, let them laugh. In 48 hours, one of these men would be sitting in a wood-paneled conference room, testifying before a Senate subcommittee about the events of this evening. The other would have already submitted his resignation letter and hired a lawyer, but that was still 2 days away. That night, on the curb outside my own home, in a neighborhood I had lived in for 11 years, I was simply a black man who had said the wrong thing to the wrong people. And I had said it on purpose. My name is Marcus Devereaux. I was 53 years old, kept my hair cut close, and drove a 7-year-old Volvo with a cracked rear bumper that I had never gotten around to fixing. I had a daughter in her second year at Duke, a golden retriever named Archie, and a house I had paid off 4 years ago. I drank my coffee black, read physical newspapers, and had a habit of arriving at meetings 15 minutes early that my team found both admirable and slightly unnerving. For the past 3 years, I had served as the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Nobody in my neighborhood knew that. That was exactly how I intended it. I had moved to Elmhurst Drive in 2013, 2 years after my wife passed, when my daughter Zora was 12 and needed a yard and a school district with a good arts program. The house was a 4-bedroom craftsman with a wide front porch and old oak trees that dropped their leaves in thick orange carpets every October. My neighbors knew me as Marcus, the man who waved from the porch, the one who shoveled the Hendersons' driveway without being asked, the one whose dog had an embarrassing fondness for Mrs. Pulaski's flower beds. Nobody asked where I worked. I told the few who did that I was a federal administrator. Technically true, spectacularly incomplete. The director of the FBI does not broadcast his home address. He does not put a flag in his yard or a bumper sticker on his Volvo. He goes quietly, and he watches, and he keeps his house on a street where nobody knows his title, which made what happened on a Tuesday evening in late October all the more absurd, and in ways I would spend months thinking about afterward, all the more necessary. I'd come home from the Hoover building and changed into the sweatshirt and jeans before walking Archie. There was a rule I had kept for years. When I came through the front door, I left the director at the threshold. Marcus lived inside. The director lived at work. That evening, Marcus was walking a 70-pound golden retriever down a street covered in fallen leaves, thinking about nothing more pressing than whether he had left the oven on. Archie was investigating a fire hydrant with the focused intensity of a homicide detective when the patrol car first slowed beside me. I did not think much of it. Patrol cars slow down. That is what they do. But when it made a U-turn at the corner and came back and the window came down, I felt that specific iron-dense pressure settle below my sternum that tells you exactly what category of situation you have entered before a single word has been spoken. "You live around here?" the officer asked. He was young, maybe 26, with a square jaw and light eyes and the kind of expression that suggested the answer was already filed. "I do," I said. 4112, the one with the oak trees." He looked at the house, then back at me, and something settled in his face. The shape of a conclusion arrived at before a conversation has really begun. He said they had received a call, a suspicious individual in the area. "I'm the resident," I said. "Sir, I'm going to need you to show me some ID." What I pulled from my pocket was not my driver's license. Somewhere between the fire hydrant and the U-turn, I had made a quiet decision to wait and see exactly how far this went before I used the easy exit. I held out my bureau credentials, the black leather wallet, the gold shield, the official photograph, the full designation embossed in government ink. The officer took it, examined it with the expression of a man reading something that contradicts his expectations and deciding whether to revise the expectation or dismiss the document, and passed it through the window to his partner. "This says FBI," the partner said. He was older, maybe 40, a gray mustache and the tired eyes of too many night shifts. "It does," I said. "You're a federal agent?" I'm a federal employee. The younger officer had gotten out of the car by then. He came around the front bumper and looked at me the way a man looks at something mildly unusual he has decided is not worth adjusting his worldview for. His voice took on that careful, patient, minimally condescending tone reserved for people who have been pre-categorized. Sir, this is a standard ID card. I've seen better fakes at airport gift shops. Is there someone we can call? A family member? I have a daughter at Duke, I said. Constitutional law. But I don't think she needs to be called for this. The younger officer exchanged a glance with his partner. That glance, brief, unguarded, eloquent, was the moment I made my final decision. Not when they zip-tied my wrists. Not when they had me sit on the curb. That glance. In it I read everything I needed to know about how this night was being categorized. I decided it was going to be educational for everyone present. At the precinct, they put me in a gray intake room. Fluorescent light humming above a bolted table, 2 plastic chairs, the acoustic tile ceiling water-stained at one corner. The younger officer came in with a clipboard and sat across from me with the detached efficiency of someone performing a routine he found neither interesting nor troubling. Occupation? He said, pen ready. Federal law enforcement? He wrote something and looked up, and there was the ghost of that smile again. The card lists a title. Says, Director. He let the words sit between us. Director of what, exactly? Of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I said. I am the director of the FBI. That was when he laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a full body-involved laugh that pushed him back from the table. He turned and called his partner's name. The older officer appeared in the doorway, coffee in hand. The younger one said, He says he's the director of the FBI. The older officer looked at me. Something moved across his face. The involuntary flicker of a smile at something improbable, pressed down, but not quite fast enough. Sir, he said carefully, is there any medication you might have missed today? I held his gaze and said nothing. In that silence, full and steady, the silence of a man who has conducted interrogations across 4 continents, I let myself think about what had brought me to this room. I thought about 1994, 23 years old at Quantico, the only black man in a cohort of 11. My supervisor, a former Army man named Henderson, had pulled me aside after my 3rd week and said, You will have to work twice as hard as everyone else here. Not because it is fair, because it is true. The sooner you understand the difference between fairness and reality, the further you will go. He had not said it with pity. He had said it the way you tell someone there is a dangerous curve ahead on the road they are on, not to stop them, but because they need to know. I had worked twice as hard, special agent at 26, supervisory agent at 31, section chief at 38, the youngest in bureau history at the time, Washington field office, national security branch, 2 years in London that took a decade off my sleep quality and added 20 years of strategic instinct. Senate confirmed, briefed 4 presidents, my photograph on the wall of the Hoover building, and I was sitting in a gray intake room being asked about my medication by a man who had never heard my name. The irony was not decorative. In my 3 years as director, I had pushed hard for a comprehensive reform initiative targeting implicit bias across state and federal law enforcement partnerships. I had the data, the longitudinal studies, the incident analyses. I had sat in meetings where well-intentioned people argued about whether the numbers were really as stark as they appeared. I had said yes, quietly and specifically, every time. But statistics live on paper. A gray intake room at 9:40 on a Tuesday night is not on paper. It is bolted to the floor. The older officer returned 10 minutes later with a paper cup of water, which he set before me with something situated between courtesy and apology. I had the sense he was beginning, somewhere in the back of his professional judgment, to feel the first low-frequency signal of unease. He had run my name and come back with nothing actionable, because my real title and my federal personnel file were behind clearance walls a standard police query would not come within 300 yards of. But something about the way I sat was working on him. I had not asked for a phone call. I had not raised my voice. I had the patience of a man who knows with complete certainty that the resolution of this situation is not in doubt. Only the timeline. Can I ask you something? He said, coming in and sitting across from me. Of course. Why didn't you just tell us who you were when we first stopped you? You could have avoided all of this." I looked at him for a moment. The fluorescent light hummed. "I did tell you," I said. "I showed you my credentials. You told me they looked like something from an airport gift shop." He had no answer to that. He looked at the table. He left the room. I sat alone in the gray light, the paper cup untouched in front of me, and I waited. Waiting is most of what this kind of work actually is. The long, unglamorous architecture of patience around which everything else is built. What I did not know, what neither of those officers knew, was that 4 blocks away, Mrs. Kwan had already made 2 phone calls within 90 seconds of watching me leave in that patrol car. The first was to her son, a district court judge. The second was to a number I had given her 3 years earlier over her back fence on a quiet October morning, when I explained that if she ever saw something at my house that seemed wrong, she should call that number and say one word. Just Elmhurst. Nothing else. She had looked at me with her dark, calibrated eyes, nodded once, and gone back to her garden. In 3 years, she had never needed to use it. That evening, she used it. The number rang to Deputy Director Caroline Marsh, who was at a dinner in Georgetown mid-sentence when her phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. She saw the word. She set down her fork, excused herself from a conversation with a senior official from the Justice Department, walked out into the cold October air, and made 4 phone calls in 6 minutes. The 4th was to the Chief of Police of the Metropolitan Police Department, who had been asleep. He sat upright in bed upon hearing Caroline's voice and the sequence of words she used, and said something she declined to repeat to me verbatim, though her expression when she referenced it suggested it had been genuinely creative. Back in the intake room, I heard the corridor change. Not loud, controlled, but urgent in the specific way that happens when a situation has reclassified itself faster than anyone was prepared for. The door opened. The older officer stood there, and he looked different. The tired certainty had gone out of him completely, replaced by something I recognized as the early stages of a very bad night, whose full dimensions he was only beginning to understand. "Mr. Devereaux," he said. The Mr. came out flat and stripped of every inflection it had carried before. "There's someone here who would like to speak with you." Behind him in the corridor stood a man in a dark suit with a bureau ID clipped to his lapel. Agent Daniel Torres, one of my 4-person security detail, whom I'd given the evening off, and who I could tell from his face had very strong feelings about that decision. Torres looked at the zip tie still on my wrists. He looked at the older officer. Something passed between them that required no words and left no ambiguity. "Evening, Marcus," he said. "Evening, Daniel," I said. He produced a multi-tool from his jacket pocket and cut the zip tie in one clean motion. I rolled my wrists. From down the corridor came the younger officer's voice, rising slightly, and then, unmistakably, Caroline Marsh's voice cutting across it, precise as a scalpel, and then silence. "Your car's out front. Archie's in it." Mrs. Kwan fed him. "Of course she did," I said. I picked up the paper cup of water from the bolted table and drank it. Then I walked to the door. The older officer stepped aside, and I walked out into the corridor of the precinct, and everything that happened next was the kind of thing that takes months to fully unfold, but begins in a single moment. The moment when 2 men understand, simultaneously and completely, exactly what they have done. The precinct lobby was not a large space. Under ordinary circumstances, it held a dispatch desk, 2 rows of plastic chairs bolted to the floor, a bulletin board covered in laminated notices, and a vending machine that dispensed coffee the color and approximate flavor of roof runoff. Under ordinary circumstances, it was a room that asked nothing of the people passing through it. That night, it had become something else entirely. The kind of space that happens when 6 people in federal credentials arrive simultaneously, and the ordinary geometry of authority inverts itself without warning. Caroline Marsh was standing near the dispatch desk when I came through the corridor door. She was 51, 5'4", with close-cropped gray hair and the posture of a woman who had spent 30 years reminding rooms full of men that she was the most prepared person in them. She wore the blazer she kept at the office for late calls. She looked at me. She looked at my wrists where the zip tie had been. The tendons in her jaw moved once. "Marcus," she said. "Caroline," I said. "Thank you for coming." Mrs. Kwan said, "Elmhurst," She did. Behind her, 2 agents from my detail were stationed at the entrance. A third spoke quietly but with unmistakable purpose to the duty sergeant, who had the expression of a man watching a very large wave approach a very small beach. In the corner of the lobby near the plastic chairs stood the younger officer. He had his hands at his sides and was very still. The stillness of a person whose body has received information that the mind is still working to process. He was staring at me, not with amusement now, with something that looked, from the outside, exactly like understanding arriving too late. Caroline crossed the lobby and stopped in front of him. She was half a head shorter. It made no difference. "Officer Brennan," she said, reading his name tag with the brisk neutrality of someone taking inventory. "I am Deputy Director Caroline Marsh, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The man you detained this evening is Director Marcus Devereaux. He is my direct superior. He is the senior law enforcement officer in this country, and he has been sitting in your intake room for the past hour with his hands zip-tied behind his back." She paused for exactly 1 second. "I'd like you to think carefully about your next words." Brennan opened his mouth. He closed it. His partner, Officer Okafor, took a half step forward and then stopped, reconsidering the geometry of the situation. "Ma'am," Brennan started, "we received a call about a suspicious—" "I know what call you received," Caroline said. Her voice was level and quiet, the specific kind of quiet that carries further than shouting. "I also know that you were presented with valid federal credentials and chose to dismiss them. I know that you transported a federal official against his will, without cause, and that this exchange is being documented. What I'd like to know is whether you have anything you would like to say for the record right now, or whether you would prefer to wait until your union representative is present." Brennan said nothing. The lobby was very quiet. The duty sergeant had stopped pretending to look at his computer. I walked across the lobby and stopped beside Caroline. Brennan looked at me, and his face did something complicated. The amusement entirely gone, replaced by a sequence of expressions moving quickly through shock, embarrassment, and the dawning arithmetic of professional consequence. "I want you to understand something," I said. My voice came out even and unhurried, the way it does when I have decided exactly what I want to say and have no desire to say anything more or less than that. "What happened tonight is going to be reviewed. That is not a threat. It is a process, and it exists for a reason. But I want you to hear this from me, directly, in this room. The reason I did not invoke my title the moment you stopped me on that sidewalk was not because I was confused. It was because I wanted to understand firsthand what the experience actually is, what it costs a person. I sit in meetings where we discuss this in the abstract. Tonight was not abstract. Brennan stood very still. Something moved behind his eyes that I could not fully read, the beginning of genuine understanding, or simply the recognition of how badly his evening had ended. I did not pretend to know which. I turned and walked toward the exit. Torres fell into step beside me. The cold October air hit my face when we pushed through the door, and it smelled exactly as it had before. Wood smoke, damp leaves, the bite of a night going toward frost. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the lights low and a cup of tea I let go cold, and I thought with the deliberate architectural calm of a man who has made a decision and is now building what comes next. Because what happened that evening was not going to stay in that precinct. It was not going to be filed and forgotten, processed through the ordinary machinery of a complaint that goes nowhere. I was the director of the FBI, and what had happened to me happened to other people every day who did not have my title or my deputy director arriving in a blazer with 4 federal agents. That asymmetry, what my position made possible and what other people had no access to, was not something I was prepared to ignore. By 3 a.m, I had made 5 calls. The first was to the Inspector General of the Metropolitan Police Department. The second was to the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. The third was to my own Office of Professional Responsibility. By 4, I had a framework. By 5:30, Torres was at the door as I had asked, and I was already showered and dressed, coffee in hand, black as always. At some point past midnight, I had called Zora. She picked up on the 3rd ring, groggy, and then immediately not groggy. "Dad, it's 3 a.m. "I know. I'm sorry. I wanted you to hear it from me first." I heard her sit up in bed. the specific recalibration of her attention that she had inherited entirely from her mother. "What happened?" I told her, briefly and completely. I heard her breathing change about halfway through, going tightly controlled, the way it does when she is holding something at arm's length until she decides what to do with it. "Are you okay?" she said. "I'm fine. And I'm angry. Both things are true." A pause. Then, Mom would have filed the lawsuit already. I looked at my wife's photograph on the shelf above the radiator, laughing at something off camera, completely alive. Completely herself. "Your mother would have had it in federal court by midnight," I said. "I'm a slower and more bureaucratic person, but I'll get there." She laughed, small and real, and something in my chest loosened. "Love you, Dad." "I love you, Zora." The official review began the following morning. I will not describe all of it. The process is procedural. The documentation runs to several hundred pages and is now part of the public record. What I will say is that it moved faster than these processes typically move, for reasons everyone understood. The subject of the incident had a direct line to every office that mattered and intended to use it. Officer Kyle Brennan was placed on administrative leave within 72 hours. His partner, Officer Okafor, followed 2 days later. The internal affairs investigation took 11 weeks. Both officers received formal findings of misconduct. Brennan, whose laughter in the intake room had been captured on the precinct's own recording system, received the harsher finding. He resigned before the final disciplinary hearing and hired a lawyer, as I had predicted from the curb. Okafor accepted a demotion and a transfer, and, to his credit, later submitted a voluntary written statement acknowledging specifically what he had done wrong, not in vague language, not in the general grammar of regret, but precisely and linearly, the way an honest accounting of a bad decision actually reads. I read it carefully. I thought he might eventually become the kind of officer worth having. I did not know for certain. I noted the possibility. The Senate subcommittee hearing was held 6 weeks after the incident. I testified. I declined the framing of victim, explicitly on the record. I testified as the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, describing a first-hand encounter with a documented systemic problem, presenting 3 years of compiled data alongside the personal account of one Tuesday evening in October. I wore the gray suit. I answered every question without raising my voice or using the words outrage or unacceptable, because those words end conversations and I wanted to continue them. The hearing ran 4 hours. The footage was watched 12 million times in the first week. The reform package that emerged was not everything I had pushed for. It never is. But it was more than had moved in the previous decade. And it moved because a specific documented thing had happened to a specific documented person who had the standing and the determination to sit in a wood-paneled room and describe it precisely, under oath, for the record. I thought about the other specific documented things that happened every day to people who did not have that standing. I thought about it every remaining day of my tenure. I stayed on as director for 14 more months. When I left the Hoover building for the last time, on a Friday in December, early afternoon, with Torres carrying a box of photographs and Zora standing by the elevator, I stopped at the front door and looked back down the corridor. I thought about what it had cost and what it had purchased, and whether the math was right, and decided that this kind of math is never exactly right, and asking whether it is keeps you from doing the work. I had done the work. I would keep doing it in the ways still available to me. Mrs. Kwan was on her porch when I came home that final evening, a bowl of something covered in foil held out as I came up the walk. She said nothing about the hearing or the tenure or the 11 weeks of reviews. She looked at me with her dark, calibrated eyes and said, "You look tired." "I am tired," I said. "Good tired or bad tired?" I thought about it. Archie was at the fence, tail moving, waiting to be let through. "Good tired," I said. She nodded, satisfied, and went back inside. I set the bowl on the kitchen table, unclipped Archie's leash, and led him into the backyard. The December air was sharp and clean, the oak trees bare, their branches black against a sky going from gray to dark. I stood on the back porch and held my coffee in both hands and looked at the yard and the fence and the quiet, ordinary street. And I thought about a Tuesday evening in October when a patrol car made a U-turn and everything that followed, and what it had meant to sit in a gray room and wait with the certainty that the situation was not in doubt. The coffee was not bitter. For the first time in a long while, it tasted exactly like what it was, warm and real, and mine.